Right, ladies and gentlemen, we have Phil Drysdale here. Dude, thanks so much for doing this. I've
Thank you.
I 2x speed yesterday got my way through most of your talk on spiral dynamics. And so
Shut up. That's
now
like
my
15 hours or something. What
I
do you
got I
do? Do
got
you
I
have a
got deep.
job?
I got deep. Not really. Not
We're
really.
getting an insight into how Johnny's improv career is going. Guys, we need
Oh
to book
my
in some
gosh.
workshops or something because he's got 8 hours to kick. You know?
So much time. So my head is reeling now with this extra framework to all these questions I wanted to ask you today.
Right.
But I think I got maybe a titch of that framework, partially through Richard Rohr's Falling Upward, and
Yeah.
I gave
Yeah.
that book
He's
a
big in developmental theory and things like that, which
yeah.
spiral dynamics falls into. Yeah.
Yeah, but what I love about you, Phil, so much is like how deep you go on these. Like, yeah, for each stage, I think you had like 2.5 to 3 hours,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then for
And I didn't even do all the stages as well. I was like, well, I better try and keep it short. And it was like 17 hours or something by the time I was done. And I was like, fuck, I've got a lot more to do probably. So I just put it to the side. So
I think the last your last two, I got about like an hour in, and I'm like, okay, I got to skip to the next one just so I get an overview.
I love it.
Anywho, so that framework is going to be added to this in my mind while I'm asking questions today. And if people don't know about spiral dynamics, don't worry. There's 15 hours online. You can find it at Phil's podcast, right?
There's got to be
And
like a
YouTube.
101 or something somewhere that would be
I
better,
know. I'd
you
love to
know,
see you
two,
try
three
to do
hours.
that.
Oh, God. That was me trying to
Oh,
do
was
that.
it? Okay,
I was like, oh,
great.
this will take like, you know, like a month to teach, but I could probably cut it down to like 15 hours.
Phil, I wonder if we could start just as kind of a springboard into this conversation. A little bit, just you introducing yourself and telling people a little bit about what it is you do and what you focus on a little bit. And then
Sure.
also, I'm kind of curious too. The follow up question to that would be like the why behind that. Like, what inspires you to do what you do?
Yeah. So I grew up a PK, pastor's kid,
Mm-hmm.
which was a whole world that we could talk about forever. But it was great. It was my parents were amazing. They were loving. They were kind. They were kind of like if you have a spectrum of like types of pastors where you know you've got the money grabbing jet owning pastors on one side. My parents were on the other side, which to be fair, as a teenager, I was not pleased about. I would have
Yeah, you
preferred the
want that
jet.
money. You want those money pastors.
100%,
It's a
100%.
lot more fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted the righteous gemstones, and I got like you know Mother Teresa, you know, living in the slums.
I'm sorry.
But I grew up very, very Christian, like very Christian. They were
Mm-hmm.
like super Christian. I'm trying to think, like you know, no Harry Potter books,
In
no,
Scotland,
you know,
is that
and
right?
this is in Scotland. Well, we moved around throughout the UK, so
Okay,
Scotland and England.
gotcha.
Yeah, but mostly Scotland, most of my upbringing. And I kind of coming out of school decided screw this, they have no money. I've grown up like getting fourth hand clothes, you know, like the clothes at the thrift store were too expensive, so we wait for people to buy those and then give them to us. You know, like we are like poor. Like my dad could have made more money if he quit his job as a pastor and went on welfare, like
Wow.
legit, but he would really believed in
Wow.
what he was doing. So like we were poor. And I was like, screw that, I am done. So at 16, I like immediately got a full-time job. I went into IT. I eventually started my own business and I did very well with that. But the whole time I was still quite Christian. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
helped out at youth groups. I got involved in churches. You know, I really wanted to figure out. And the thing is with Christians, right? You know, you got a few different types of Christians, but the type of Christian I was, like, I wanted to be a good Christian, right? I
Yeah.
like legit believed like if this was real, right? If you're trying to please some benevolent God up in the sky who's going to burn you
Yeah.
in hell if you're wrong, you got to get it right, right? Because
Yeah.
stakes are high, right? You know, this is not like a you know math test or something which you can resit next year. If you're wrong, it's eternity burning in your own fats, hanging out with Hitler. You know, I mean, it's
Yes.
bad.
Phil,
Um,
and good on you for logically making that realization.
right? I mean,
That makes
you can
sense.
never fault me for not being logical.
Yeah, that makes sense, right?
Yeah, I was full on. And credit to my mom. My mom taught me really early on. She says, don't accept truth from anybody, even me, any authorities. Figure out what's true for yourself. Always seek what's true
That's
and pursue it. And I was like,
that's
hats
huge.
off. So yeah, and that's always been my ethos is trying to figure out what's right, what's true. And so by doing that, I moved around a lot. I tried a lot of new churches. I'd always try a church and go, this is great. But then I'd be like, but they don't do this, and I'm pretty sure you should be doing that, or or they don't read the Bible quite right, or they don't worship God right, or whatever. And eventually I found myself over in California, and I had given away all my money, my business. I moved to California to go join a ministry school there, and I was going to figure out how to do things even better.
And what ministry school was this?
So there's a place over in California called Bethel.
And where is that located?
Christian, in the middle of nowhere. It's a place called Redding, right in the very north of California.
Okay.
It's in the Bible Belt of California, which is a thing I apparently didn't know existed, but it does. It is the widest, most right-wing place in California you could ever imagine. Like, so white, so right-wing. Like, yeah. And I'm like from Europe, right? So I get there and I'm like, where's all the people of color? And why is everyone holding a gun? Fuck, I thought this was California. I thought it was relatively safe here. And they're like calling on like fasting to end abortion and end the gay agenda. And they're calling on, they're doing prayer services to nominate God's choice, who was Mitt Romney at the time, I think, who was like a Mormon. Right? So you've got Christians who hate Mormons. Like evangelical Christians hate Mormons. They see them as a cult. And they're going, oh, this guy's God's choice. And it couldn't possibly be this black guy who says he's a Christian and goes to church every Sunday because he's the Democrat. And I'm just watching this as a European and I'm going, this is a weird dynamic. Like, this is strange. I don't really know what's going on. I'm too removed from it, but this is weird. And so like, I like was off the deep end over there. I spent years there, involved there. I got involved working with the church and their ministries and stuff. Eventually started traveling and speaking all over the world. I spoke in churches, conferences, Bible schools, colleges. I was doing like 400 meetings a year, one of the years. Like, I mean, it was like a lot. Like, I was just nonstop, back to back to back, speaking and sharing. And so I was really passionate about figuring out what's right and then helping other people do the right thing and live life well. And it's in traveling, right? So I'm trying to give you really condensed in traveling. And in all of this, I mean, even when I first got to Bethel, I was like, this is not really where I'm at. But I was like, it's okay. I can do life here and figure it out. And I can kind of sow seeds of doubt and dissent. We'll see what happens. So even with my traveling, I was probably teaching things that were quite different than mainstream kind of Christianity. And I myself had radically altered a lot of my views. So as I'm traveling, I'm kind of maybe giving these kind of like slightly covert messages, which were, if you were a conventional Christian and you heard me, you'd be like, oh yeah, this is pretty good. He quotes the Bible a bit. I like some of these words. I like the kind of general message. But if you were questioning your faith, you'd probably read between most of the lines I was given and going, oh, this guy's in a different place. This guy isn't there. And actually, this is really helping me in some of the ways I'm thinking and starting to question. And so in doing that, I started to find like dozens of people at the end of these messages. Sorry.
You need to take it? You can take it. Is it the
I'm
bro?
Important. It's my timer telling me to get my dog's food up.
We could take a break for that.
No, my wife's on it. So I would have all these people come to me at the end of the service and like pull me aside and be like, hey, like, you seem like someone I could maybe talk to about this, but I'm questioning some stuff and I don't have anyone to talk to. Because the dynamic is, when you start questioning really serious stuff in your faith, you can't really talk to anyone in the faith about it. That's
correct.
Right?
That is
you
correct.
Get ostracized like that. Like your pastor bails on you, your community bails on you. I've talked to people where their families have bailed on them, their partners, their wife, husband. Well, you don't really have partners in Christianity. You just have husband and wife, right? No, not on our watch. But your husband, your wife would like literally walk away if you questioned enough of the right things. Your parents would disown you, your kids would disown you, and so these people were like terrified, asking these questions internally, but not really having any space to process them, and would come up to the random stranger that's just come into town that they're never going to see again, especially after the message I just gave. I'm never getting invited back, right? So they're like, I'll go talk to this guy, and I found that like there's hundreds and hundreds of people everywhere I go. They're going through this process, and I started to realize, if you are a conventional Christian, if you're a pretty happy regular Christian in America, you could literally stand up in any room in America, probably even an atheist convention, and say, could someone help me with my Christian faith? And you probably have like several people go, oh yeah, let's talk about it, right? But if you have doubts and are questioning your faith, not only are you in very few rooms, you've kind of bubbled yourself as to what rooms you're ever in. But if you stood up and said anything like that, people would immediately shut you down and stop that question. And so I was realizing there's millions of people out there helping Christians be better Christians. And hats off to them, right? So I'm not anti-faith, I'm not anti-Christianity. If Christianity works for you, you should definitely just chill out and enjoy it, like while it lasts. Do it.
While it lasts.
Give me a call if you have problems in the future. But for the people that it isn't working for, like, there's very few people for them to turn to and talk to and engage with and process these questions and go through all this like very traumatic fear and anxiety and shame and guilt and regret and the emotions. I mean, they just stack upon, like, I mean, it's just endless. And so I started working with those people probably about 8 years ago. In that kind of window, I started working kind of very intentionally with people that had doubts and questions and kind of giving them space to question their faith and see what was next for them. And so that's what I do now. The reason I do it is I think people need help, you know, and I've seen the damage that religion can do for a lot of people. I've seen religion help a lot of people. So again, it's not a anti-religion message per se. I think there's a lot of things to be anti-religion about for sure. But as a whole, it helps a lot of people, right? You know, you think of the average person that I don't know, comes out of prison or is struggling with alcoholism or drug addiction. A lot of those people really find a lot of support and stability in something like a community and a church. You know, that can be really helpful for them. So religion can help certain people really well. But other people, religion can harm insurmountably, right? You think about the young kid that's realizing that they're not cisgender or they're maybe gay or something. They're very likely to have a very bad time if they're in an evangelical church growing up, right? Their parents, their family, their community, their friends are all, the kids walking on flipping tightropes the whole time because any wrong move and you're fucked, you're out, right? I mean, everyone turns their back on you and you are alone. I've talked to some kids that are literally homeless on their phone saying, I literally am homeless right now because I just got kicked out of my house because I told my parents I might be trans or gay or anything, right? I mean, even just questioning their faith. I've talked to some kids that have been kicked out of their house just because they're going, I'm not sure I believe in Jesus anymore. That's it. That's enough for your parents to kick you out the house. Like, obviously not standard within Christianity, but exists within some of these faith groups. And so, yeah, the reason I do it is I see these people and I see the need and I see the hurt and I see the pain and I want to help that as best I can. I'm probably not the best person to do it, but it's the sort of thing of like, until better people come along, and there's a lot better people that have come along in the last few years, it's become a much more fleshed out kind of thing. And there's a lot more people helping people that are much better than me. So I'm really thankful for that, but I've got nothing else to do at this point. I'm kind of like, that's my thing. And I really enjoy it. I really enjoy helping people. So yeah.
Yeah, it's great. For anyone like myself who's come out of a very religious upbringing and moved on or evolved or whatever, to feel that like, oh, there's other people having this conversation. Oh, okay, cool. I mean, just having the camaraderie in that of like,
yeah,
oh, yes. I know what you're talking about, that experience, cha-ching, right? Maybe I had a different experience than yours, but there's enough analogy there. And like even getting to have that conversation is just so helpful. And like potentially even like healing for you too, to kind of be like, okay, like, you know, even understanding, like putting in perspective what you grew up in, you have a healthier handle on that when you can talk about it with people and hear from other people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the thing is, we don't have a way to contextualize, right? So if you've grown up in one of these bubbles, you don't really understand. Even when you leave, you don't fully understand that a lot of what happened to you was really wrong. You can still walk away going, I'm wrong in this, or I've made the right decision, but I'm still going to go to hell, even potentially. And so you live waking up. I talk to atheists that don't believe in God and don't believe in hell, that are decades out of religion, who will tell me that they still wake up in the night with night terrors. They've sweated so much that the beds are soaked and they need to change them because they're dreaming that God is real and they're going to go to hell. That's how deeply embedded some of this stuff is. And so hearing each other's stories, hearing each other's journeys, listening to experts that say, no, this isn't correct. And actually, this is really inappropriate behavior. And this is actually quite cult-like behavior, or this is actually very abusive. And this can lead to religious trauma. And actually, here's what religious trauma is. And here's how to unpack some things that might have happened to you as you've developed in these areas. And those kind of conversations, you go, oh, I'm not insane. Oh, I'm not
Yeah.
crazy. Oh, this is normal. Oh, other people are like this. There's other people that have had this experience. I'm not alone in this. Those are incredible feelings
Yeah.
to suddenly be hit with, to go, oh, it's not just me. That is a nice feeling. It's a nice feeling, whatever, right? I mean, it's nice if you're in uh, the living room watching the Super Bowl and you're the only person that supports the other team, right? And then one other person starts cheering for your team and you're like, oh, that's not just me, right? That's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
nice
Yeah.
feeling. It's nice.
Yeah.
It's nice to know that we're not alone and there's someone else on our team. There's someone else that gets it, or whatever it is. And so yeah, I think it's huge, and I get that message all the time. People just saying, honestly, more than anything, just hearing my own voice through your platform, your Instagram, your podcast, whatever. When you interview someone on your podcast, I hear what I'm thinking through coming into my ears, right? That is a nice feeling. You just go, oh,
Yes.
you're like me. You think like me. Maybe these thoughts aren't so bad. Maybe these thoughts aren't so wrong. Maybe I might even be right. It's of course possible we're all completely wrong in
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Exactly. My last guest on the podcast was Holly Laurent, who has a podcast called Mega, and it's they're her and her husband run it, and they do it as pastors at a fictional mega church, and it's all satirical.
yes, I've been told about this. I've not checked it
Yeah,
out.
they're wonderful. They're wonderful. But Holly grew up in a very religious upbringing and has had a lot of religious trauma that she's kind of dealt with through comedy, and she has a lot of people reach out to her too. Who's like, yeah, that comedy is like kind of helped me process some of the things that I grew up with.
For real.
And
That's why, I
whatnot.
mean, 90% of what I post is memes and taking the piss and having a laugh, because honestly, I don't really have any expert training in this, right? I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an expert. So all I know to do is laugh and look at it from like taking a step back enough that you can look at it and go, that's fucking insane. That's actually insane. Like, if we can take enough step back to look at the stuff that's happened to us and laugh at it, that's deeply healing,
Yeah.
removing ourselves from that enough that we go, oh yeah, you're right, that is totally nuts. That is funny that we would think that actually means something, that actually has some hold over us, or whatever it is. Yeah, it can be huge.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Huh. Man, so do you feel in part, I feel a lot of people who really went deep into their like religious beliefs had a very like genuine thing, like you said, like you believed it so like heartfully that like if this is what reality is and hell exists, like I'm gonna attack it with all my might, right? Do you think
Right.
that the potentially a feature of pursuing spirituality with that sort of intensity is it's almost inevitable that this phase of deconstruction is still part of the spiritual journey for people?
um there's a lot of answers to that, like yes, no, maybe. So I don't think it's inevitable. I don't.
You don't.
I've seen people that have pursued as doggedly as I did and died of old age
Sure.
exactly where they basically
I would
grew up
agree with
in
that.
some way, shape,
Yeah, I
or
would
form.
agree with that.
So I don't think it's absolutely inevitable. But I will say there's a lot of studies on people that de-church or disaffiliate or deconvert. There's lots of different terms that associate with slightly different things. So de-church means you leave church, but you might not leave your faith. Deconvert means you convert away from one faith, but you might then become a different faith, or you might even still go to church, just not tell anyone you've not, like a Christian, because you want community here. So these different terms have a lot of different nuances. If you'd have like a Venn diagram with about 100 different circles, and somewhere in the middle there'd probably be something like deconstruction that kind of captures like most of them to some degree. And most studies that are done on this people group, peoples that move away from faith or evolve beyond their faith, what you find consistently is they are extraordinarily passionate about their faith. They're not the people that are half-assed about it.
Yes.
So there are half-assed people that leave faith,
Yeah.
just like there's really passionate people that stay in faith. But what they found is if you grab 100 people that are in church today, and you grab 100 people that have deconstructed, deconverted, de-churched, whatever it might be, what you'll find is on average, the group that have left, that 100 people, are going to have read their Bible more often, prayed more often. They know their Bible better. They're more likely to have Bible college degrees, study, that sort of stuff. They were more likely to be involved in church heavily. They're more likely to be on staff or a pastor. They're more likely to, it's endless. They attended church more often than the group that still are in church. Now, of course, people in that hundreds that are just as passionate and more passionate. But if you average it out, it's actually a total misnomer, because basically you can kind of broadly speaking, you can look at very passionate people and go, there's a higher chance that they're going to leave their church than the people that aren't as passionate, which is funny because, of course, what's a good pastor going to do? They're going to try and get people to come more often, get involved, read your Bible more, pray more, really think about this stuff. And what they don't know is they're probably setting up a lot of people on a path that does often lead to moving beyond the limited constrictions of their faith, because all groups kind of have some form of boundaries and boxes that they need to be in that group. Yes. And at some point, if you're really intentional about growing, you're going to eventually outgrow the kind of container you're in. For most people, it depends.
That resonates with me, and also kind of confirms some suspicions I've had too of like people who potentially have moved beyond their faith. There's something like when you're when you're kind of haphazardly religious, or just like culturally religious or whatever, that's just like, right, what's the push to move or change, And so, there's something about the passion that sometimes leads people out. That makes complete sense.
I mean, if you're just happy just showing up to church once a week and you kind of go, you sing some songs, you listen to the pastor, you go home and you go, yeah, it's fine, whatever. There's about the same amount of push to go as there is to leave. Like, you just don't really care. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you're like, whatever, I don't really care. I'm not invested in staying or going. But if you are insanely passionate, going, the reason I live is to attend this church just so we can be right, so we can change the world. And in doing that, you start to go, wait, we're not changing the world the same way I would like to, or maybe this isn't quite right. You're much more likely to, you're likely to go either way, of course, but you're much more likely to be a person that goes, actually, I'm out, because those people passionate make big decisions,
Yeah. Phil, okay, I got it. This might be a multi-parter, and it might have some presuppositions built right into it. But do you, first of all, maybe this is a question about your audience, and maybe a little bit about your evolution too, packed into this question. But do you feel that your audience is or can be, or you can reach those people who are still in the church? Or is it usually by the time you're having the conversations you're talking to a different audience?
Sure.
Or maybe another way to phrase that is, if you have family and friends who are very religious, is it kind of live and let live in your opinion? Or is there like hey, like this idea of like, hey, let me reach out to you, and I don't know, it's a built-in thought, but like bring you to a better spot, to my opinion, or like, What's your feelings on that question?
Like, I think at the end of the day, this is going to be so unique to individual people. Right? Yeah. So, I was talking to someone yesterday, her dad is texting her every day with these big, long Bible verses. And, like, she got a tattoo of a snake, and he found out about it through her brother, and he's sending her text messages of Bible verses that talk about snakes being evil. And you're like, oh, this is subtle, it's just that sort of thing. And he's just constantly harassing. And you're like, okay, so what kind of conversation about moving beyond faith can I have with someone they can't even talk to you and go, hey, I heard you got a tattoo, that makes me a bit uncomfortable. They're like just sending you a Bible verse out of nowhere and going, I hope this speaks to you. It's like the most passive aggressive, like, shit ever, right? I mean, it's like, what is this? Like, that person is not going to be able to sit down and have a rational discussion about, I've moved beyond faith, I don't have anything against your faith, that is just going to be boom, 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 right? It's going to be AOC sitting down and talking to someone that stormed the Capitol. Those two are not going to have a productive conversation. Now, you could disagree on which one you think might be the one that's right or wrong. Hopefully you don't. But at the end of the day, these two kind of polar opposites are not going to have a helpful, meaningful conversation. But we do need certain people that can talk to someone that stormed the Capitol's building, right? We need someone that's going to be able to reach these people so that they might slightly evolve, or, you know, maybe die of old age and the kids will evolve, or whatever it looks like. You know, sometimes that is what it looks like. It looks like people are not going to change. They're heavily ingrained and they just need to die off. And that's part of humanity evolving and growing. But I do believe there are people that can reach people within the church that maybe are somewhat content, but their actions are harmful, right? And this is the problem with leaving people and, you know, bygones be bygones and, you know, and all that, like, well, they're happy. Yeah, but they're harming certain people groups. And actually 100%. Their actions are causing societal problems, you know, that whatever it might be. That becomes a problem. So we do need maybe some people that are willing to kind of go into that and work with those people and help those people. And that's kind of what I did for a long time, right? Traveling and speaking and trying to give a message that might kind of move them a few steps forwards. And, you know, I had like this old mentor who used to say, like, he says, like, most people want to hurl a tree at people, but you're generally better speaking, just planting a seed and then coming back and watering it every now and again. And like, I think it's a clunky as hell analogy because no one hurls trees. But well, actually, I'm Scottish. We do toss capers. But you know, generally speaking, that would be a better person to reach that group. You know, I talked to someone the other day who's starting a podcast and like, oh, what I want to do is I want to reach this very fundamental group called IHOP, International House of Prayer. Terribly named because obviously IHOP. But it's this very fundamental group. They believe the world's ending anytime. They pray 24/7 about it. They're very fundamental. And she said, I believe I'm going to do a podcast that's going to help change what they think. And I'm like, oh, so what are you going to talk about? And she's like, I'm going to talk about racism and sexism and how Republican ideology is destroying the world. And I'm like, do you think anyone at IHOP will listen to your podcast?
yeah, that's right.
Actually, that's a good point, right? So I'm like, so what kind of podcast do you actually need to make? Because you're making a podcast for you. And that's great. There's lots of people like you. But you need to make a podcast for them. And hopefully not the kind of podcast they already listen to that's going to just fundamentally radicalize them more, but something that speaks to them where they are, but actually encourages a little bit more inclusion, encourages a little bit more growth. And so I think there is an important need for people to fill that role. And I actually did that for a long time. I think there was too much of an overwhelming need on the other side of people that had already crossed that boundary and were desperately looking for help, or people that were... I don't want to steal the analogy because it's probably not fair, but still somewhat closeted, still hiding away in the church, not being able to say anything to their family, their friends, their pastor. They're terrified anyone finds out. Like, for them to find someone like me, I needed to be quite open about what kind of stuff I was talking about and be very clear of like, hey, if you've got questions, if you've got doubts, if you feel scared in your church, if you don't feel safe to talk to people, come talk to me. You can't do that covertly as well, or at least you won't reach as many people if you do that covertly. And so for me, I shifted away from trying to do a lot of that covert work. I think there's certain people that are still called to do that, and it's their desire and it's their passion to help those people. For me, I'm happy to talk to them as much as they're able to talk, but generally speaking, that's not a conversation we can have. You know, I talk to them all the time, and they'll have these arguments and fight with me, and I'm like, hey, I'm not here to dissuade you, to argue with you. I don't care if what you're believing works for you. You go let it work for you. Let's see how that pans out long term. I'm going to help people that are struggling and need help. You know, there's millions of people in that category, and there's like, you know, 10,000 people like me maybe that are really actively working on this. Like, we've got enough shit to deal with, right? And so it's like, I don't need to spend all my time arguing with you. I'm not going to argue you out of your faith, right? I used to believe that faith as well. No one argued me out of it. I had to grow out of it intentionally. So I just think there's a fine line to find, and there's maybe some people that really need to do that work. But yeah, because I think otherwise you do end up with these weird dualistic dynamics. Like, we're seeing the world is becoming slightly more and more dualistic. People are becoming more extreme in their fractured components. We see it in politics. We see it in all kinds of areas of life. And it doesn't work, right? Democrat, Republican is a great example. You go look at Democrats and Republicans and actually try and create some conversations. Look, there's an interesting, have you heard of perceptiongap.us? Brilliant website. Highly recommend you check it out. Listeners, check it out. Perceptiongap.us. What it is I think it's closed now. It's just the results. Or maybe it's not, actually. I'm not sure. But basically, they ask at the beginning of which party do you align with in the country. And so you would say, oh, I'm a Democrat. And they go, okay, great. And they're like, could you answer what you think about these important issues? And then you'd rate it on scale 1 to 10.
Oh, sure.
And, you know, guns,
Yeah.
abortion, whatever, free markets, whatever. And then it would say, could you say what other Democrats think? And you go, oh, yeah. And then you'd say, what do you think Republicans think, right? And so it did this, and they did tens of thousands of people did this study. And what they found was that almost everyone in the country is only about 10 points from each other. They're right in the middle, and they all kind of believe the same thing.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is they think that their team, their people, Democrats or Republicans, their guys are way more extreme than they are. And they think that the other guys are even more extreme, right? So what happens is you actually have a view of everyone out there as extremists, and I'm the only sane person. And they're thinking the same thing. And you're definitely not talking to people on the other side because they're just idiots, they're morons, they're lunatics. And actually, almost everyone in the country is generally speaking believing the same thing. And it's fascinating. So we become more and more polarized. And actually, when you look at the data, that polarization isn't there. We can talk about that, and that's a part of the system, the system of classism and power and oligarchy and all these different components that are in there that feeds that, because it wants the lower classes fighting with each other rather than going, hold on, the problem is not us, right? We are not the problem. We are the ones suffering the problem here, whether we're right or left. We are in a shit situation compared to like these people in power. But the point being that I think it's probably the same when we talk about religion. I think if you sat down with most people that are in a church and most people that are, have left church or have never been a part of church, you said, hey, what do you think about murder? What do you think about, feeding the poor? What do you think about helping orphans? What do you think about going to war? Most people would probably be like, yeah, I would be very pro feeding orphans and looking after homeless people. And I don't really get excited about going to war. That's pretty terrifying. I think most of us would agree. And yet what's interesting is if you're sitting in church every Sunday, because you hear the person in power with their more extreme perspective, you assume everyone else has that. And you even parrot some of it in a group because you don't want to be seen as wrong. And so we have these dynamics that push more and more polarization. And you're hearing from the sermon every week from the pulpit, the pastor's going, don't trust the gays, they're evil. Or, you can't trust those Dems, they're going to like destroy people because they love murdering babies. And you're hearing these kind of wild things, right? I mean, really incredibly wild. But that's the sort of stuff I grew up listening to that stuff. That was common to hear those kind of things. And so it's a weird world to grow up in, and it encourages polarization and extremism and hatred of the other group, and even an uncertainty of how much you fit in your own group. It's a weird dynamic.
That's so
that's so far from your question.
No, that's such an interesting. That's an interesting idea that like all of this like stress of like we're so different and we believe different things in this country is more fictional than reality, but causes at the end of the day such a real problem between people and families and friends. And it's like, that's the hard thing too, right? That's the hard thing about that religious conversation is it's so contentious. It's like the moment anyone even suspects your worldview is different, like it's just everyone's on edge, and it's just like, well, this conversation can't continue. You're kicked out of the house, blah blah blah. And it's like,
right.
Well, actually, we might agree a lot more, but we can't even get there in that conversation.
Right. Yeah. Huh. And a lot of people, I mean, it's projection. I mean, I had this with own family issues and stuff like that, but like there's projection as well, where they're actually scared to have this conversation because they're scared they actually probably do agree with you, and they can't accept that because that means that they can't belong to the group anymore either. And so people are terrified of actually even going there most of the time because they kind of know on some level that they do have doubts, they do have questions, that it doesn't add up for them. And we have to shut that down so we can still be a part of the community, which is ingrained, right? That's evolutionary. Like that's hundreds of thousands of years of evolution says, do not leave this group. You will get fucked up by a tiger. Do you know what I mean? It's like, that's a really good driving point. Like, I don't want to get fucked up by a tiger. I don't know about you. Like, I mean, it's a hell of a way to go. It's way more interesting than whatever way I probably do go, right? I don't know. Who knows? It's going to be boring. It's not going to be getting eaten alive by a tiger. That's a pretty cool way.
It's pretty cool.
But yeah. But my point being, like, no one wants that. So we sit there going, do not piss off the group. Do not stick out too much. Do not create a problem. You need this group to survive. That's not true per se anymore, but it feels it. It feels in our very bones that feels true. And any of us that have left these kind of communities knows that we felt it. There was a study in 2014 by Packer and Hope, and they looked at how people leave church, and they found that most people didn't leave when they got hurt. They didn't leave when they had differences of opinions and things like that. It actually, on average, took people about 7 years to leave church after they kind of started to go, I think I'm probably going to leave. And on average, they tried at least 4 churches before they actually gave up with the thing. And it shows that people don't want to leave these communities. They're kind of terrified of existing without that sort of community, because there's like, and anyone that's been a part of these communities, you can say, oh, I hate that group, they were rubbish, or, you know, like they treated me like shit when I left, or whatever. But being a part of it was great. There was something about being part of that is often very good for the vast majority of people that are in it.
I've had this talk with people a little bit this year about like this feeling of like some of like, I don't know if it was during the pandemic more it came up, but I was like, oh, you know what I miss getting together in a big group and singing songs. That's fun. I miss having some people I'm gonna be with, and we all feel like we believe the same thing together, and like there's such a nice component of the community through whatever the beliefs are that's built into religion.
I hear that so often.
It's like
I'm slightly autistic and I hate like, music, loud noise.
Okay.
So I'm just like, get me out of this place. I'm like,
how did you stay there as long as you did?
But I've heard that so many times, and I'm like, yes, insane person, that does sound great. I'm sure you must miss that. No, do not invite me when you have one.
Phil, I can't believe it took you that long to leave church then in that case.
I know, right? I used to, not joking, during like some of the churches I went to had like worship parts, which are parts where they sing for like an hour, some of them. And I would literally at the beginning just go to the bathrooms and stay there on my phone. And like people must have thought I had like serious like my whole bowels were just riddled with like tumors or something, because I was in the toilet for like an hour straight every service.
They're activated by the tambourine. As soon as that tambourine starts,
it was just too much. It's all, and it's not even good music, right? I can tolerate good music, but anyone that's good at music goes and does good music, right? They're not going to hang around the church, right? No, like Chris Martin isn't like going, you know what, I could start Coldplay, but you know what I think I really want to do? I want to sing like the same like song to like 3 chords 50 times every week for the rest of my life. I'm going to be a worship leader. No good, talented Christian musician has ever really chose to do that. It's only people that have not been able to go off and start Coldplay that go, oh, maybe I'll be a worship leader. That sounds pretty good. Sorry for shitting all over worship leaders everywhere.
Oh, man.
But I don't like music, so.
It's so funny. My husband plays the cello, and like, I'm not a huge music person either. He's great. He's super talented. But it's there's sometimes I'm like, are you gonna practice right now? Because I have to leave.
Cello, let's be honest, right? Cello is great.
Cello's great.
So my sister-in-law plays cello, and she's very good, very, very, very good. And she has like a yearly orchestra thing that she does that we often go to, because it's at Christmas. It's when we're home with the family. So we're like, oh yeah, we'll go along to her thing. And again, I'm not massive into music, don't like noise and all that kind of stuff. So not my thing, but I'm like, yeah, cool. All these people, that's great. Hey, you're doing wonderful with your cello. But you know what? Cello on its own, not a solo instrument. No one made the cello and went, this is going to be great on its own. Let's just, we're done. We finished music. Let's just have a cello. No one has ever thought that. They've gone, you know what? Maybe we should bring in some other instruments for this person, because it's not that great. Just listen to just a cello.
I'll disagree with you there. I do like listening to the cello. Here's my thing with music, or I'll say specifically music, is I can't casually listen to music. It draws my entire attention, especially if there's words. I'm like,
which is what a waste of time. Like, I can be doing so many things right now.
Yeah. I can't do something else and listen to music. It's like I have to sit down and listen to music if I'm going to listen.
I honestly, so my friends, like, they're like, well, what? You don't listen to music? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, so like, you don't like come home from work and just sit on the couch and put some music on and just sit and listen? And I'm like, I am terrified you're going to like one day just start cutting people to bits, because like, who just sits and listens to, just sit there, like just staring at the wall and listening to a song? Like, I'm like, that to me is like psychopathic level of like, I just can't even comprehend. Like, it's so far from how I think. because I couldn't do it. I would literally be like, well, obviously I should be doing something better with my time than just sitting listening to music. Put podcasts on, at least I can learn, or I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll listen to Hamilton, maybe. At least I'm like learning history as I listen to
Hamilton.
music or something. But like, I mean, God, it's like I can't just sit and stare at a wall while I listen to Katy Perry, or I don't know.
I would say the one like caveat to that is like, not every time I get high, but sometimes I'll get high and I'll be like, oh, Daft Punk. I'm just gonna go lay in bed and listen to Daft Punk, or like, and then I'm like, why don't I listen to music more? that and Christmas music.
Next time I'm high, I've never really, I just don't think of music. It's not my go-to. Which I understand. I am in like 0.001% of the earth. Like, so I expect
100%.
0 people to agree with me. But yeah, it's a weird one for sure.
Phil, what has it been like for you personally? Occupying this space, this where it is quite contentious. I think I heard you mention a couple times some like messages you've got from people that I'm like, oh my gosh, something about like, I hope you experience your family like being raped and blah blah blah. Like, what is it like for you psychologically and on a personal level to try to occupy this space and some of these interactions that you have?
It's been a journey, right? So I mean, processing these kind of, like, to be honest with you, those are the best messages because they're funny and they're so easy, right? So that particular message,
there might just be your friends just trolling you.
Oh, like, it's just like, who is this human, right? So I think I posted like on social media, and I posted something about like non-violence and talked about like, the if there's anything to be redeemed from Christianity, it's maybe the core ethic of like, hey, let's not respond to power with power. Let's not fight violence with violence. And let's try and think of more evolved ways to deal with problems rather than just returning a problem with a problem, right? And I'm like, that's a pretty great message to take from Jesus if you're going to take anything. Anyway, so some Christian sends me a message and goes, Phil, I know that you got divorced a few years ago. And they're like, I know you're single, but I hope one day you get married again and you have kids. And that one day someone breaks into your house and rapes your kids and your wife in front of you and kills them all, so that you know that violence sometimes is the answer. And I'm like, Phil, this is the Christian argument, trying to convince me of the Christian argument of that violence is actually the right way. He's praying that God allows me to get married and have kids, so that then God allows someone to break into my home and rape and kill them all. I'm like, so that I learned some arbitrary lesson. I'm like, that's too funny. I can't even see I can't even get to the darkness of that. That's just off the charts insane.
That's just good dark humor.
I mean, it's just like, I don't even like, I'm like, if I was writing some sort of weird sketch show, I couldn't have come up with something like that. It's just like, it's too implausible. But I get a lot of messages like that. People that are like, they're like some sort of cartoon character.
I love the idea of that just coming from like a compassionate voice and heart too. Like, if you could hear him say that to you, it was just said so compassionately.
I genuinely
love you into this.
The only way you'll really learn this important lesson that we fight violence with violence. The only way. I just pray right now that Brother Phil one day gets remarried.
Can we all agree to this? Amen.
Yeah. I find one time my friend sent me a link and he was like, you're going to want to see this. I click on it and it's a Facebook group. This is years ago and it's long gone, or I got blocked from it. I don't know. And it was literally a group called Pray for the Death of Phil Drysdale. It was a group and it had 60 people in it.
Amen.
60 people
pray for that death.
I would die. And I'm like, guys, I'm going to die either way. Like, that feels like a very pointless prayer. Like, maybe be more specific.
I hope they were all
timeline.
I hope they were all praying for that tiger death, Phil.
Oh, do you know what? If anyone out there believes they have a power in a prayer, please pray that I get consumed by a tiger. My wife hates that I joke about this shit, but like, I'm like, guys, I want something to put on my tombstone, right? Yeah. And realistically, the way my life's going, there's not much going on, right? I mean, it's going to be a pretty boring epitaph.
Oh, man.
So if you could just have, here lies Phil, at least most of him, he was mauled by a tiger, that would be amazing. On a tombstone. You
want that was it that grizzly man? Is that the name of that guy? Have you you know that story?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Him and his girlfriend got eaten by a bear.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to go out and seek it. Don't worry.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm gonna try to talk you off this prayer list.
Yeah. No, I'm not on the precipice about to jump, but I'm just saying, if it happens, if I'm dying of old age, I'm riddled with cancer, my kids and grandkids are around me, and a tiger bursts into the hospital room and tears me apart, I wouldn't be miffed. That'd be pretty great. What on earth are we talking about? Psychological. Well, you can probably tell what this is doing to me psychologically. I'm a fucked up guy. So I think on the whole, I'm relatively okay. Like, I think it's hard, right? Because
Yeah.
talking to people with these, so it's hard that the abuse that you get is actually the easiest part. It's
Yeah.
actually hearing the
That's
abuse
telling.
that other people have gone through. That's the hard part. Is
Wow.
I talk to dozens of people every day, and listen to their stories and listen to the way that the people in their lives have hurt them, religion has hurt them, listening to all that they're trying to navigate and work through. That takes its toll. And I took a big chunk of time off this year, actually about 2 months off, just to kind of take a breather and just kind of have a bit of space, because it takes a lot out of you. So I have something. So part of being slightly autistic is 50% of people that have autism have something called alexithymia, and alexithymia is that you don't know what emotions you're feeling. You have no knowledge of the emotions. So often I can be really sad or really happy and actually not know until I look back on it, or maybe like my wife is like, Phil, it looks like you're sad right now, and I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I am. Yeah, maybe I'm sad right now. So that's a blessing and a curse, because often I'm talking to people and like I'm probably getting very emotional, but I actually don't know, which is very helpful. But it also is a very negative that kind of all bottles up, and by the end of the day, like my wife's like, dude, you had a day today, and I'm like, yeah, I guess I did actually. Now I'm thinking about it, that was some really intense stuff I've been talking about. Yeah, you're right. And so so it can be really full on.
Do you have that? Do you have that more with some emotions than others? Is it like more pronounced with?
Pretty much across the board. I genuinely have no. Yeah, it's really weird.
And
it's so hard to describe as well, because it's just not something anyone could really, generally speaking, identify with. It's quite one in I think 1 in 50 people have it quite pronounced. So it's not that rare. But yeah, it exists.
So on reflection, you're like, oh yeah, I was feeling happy or sad or blah blah blah, but you're not as privy to that in the moment.
Yeah. Oh, I'm like pretty much. So I feel the full range of emotions. I just have no knowledge that's going on, which is, and it sounds crazy, right? Because you're like, well, like surely you could just like look at you like getting really excited,
right,
jumping up and down, and it's like, yeah, but so basically it's two sides of the brain. So one part is kind of responsible for the emotion. The other side is responsible for processing that emotion and like letting you know, hey, you're feeling really excited right now, or terrified or anxious or whatever. And they just don't speak, which is really fascinating. The bridge just like kind of shut down.
How much of a personal delay do you think you usually need to kind of like take inventory of the emotions?
It's getting better. It's getting much better. Often it'd be like months, and I was like, oh yeah, I've just been fucked up for like ages. Like I was just I was a very unhealthy person growing up. I massively, very socially inept, very completely unaware of what my needs were and how I operated. I just shut down and hid most of the time.
Wow.
Which is quite strange for people that know me now, because I'm very personal, I'm very charismatic, and I tend to read other people pretty well sometimes, not very well other times. But probably I'm in the space of like hours to a day most of the time. I think having my wife being very helpful at working with me on that has been really helpful, because I don't get to go too far without her going like, hey, what's going on with you? How are you feeling? What's happening today? Do you want to process that a bit? So that helps a lot.
Wow.
But yeah,
it's also interesting too, when you thinking about bringing like love and your wife into it, of like the dynamic of like realizing you're falling in love with someone, or like
right. Yeah. It's weird. It's like you add this weird logical layer onto your emotions, because generally speaking, I think most of us feel, I mean, I don't know, but I assume most people feel an emotion and they just know that emotion is there. Whereas I have to have this logical layer of going, what am I feeling right now? What do I experience? And, so it's like a whole separate step that most people probably don't have to apply to the process of, those kind of things. It's a weird one.
That's really wild. My husband has synesthesia, which is his synesthesia is, and it's really it's dropped down to like barely nothing now, and he kind of misses it, but it's colors and sound. So he used to like get on the cello and play like a certain note, and all of a sudden like orange saran wrap just like came up all around him, and like colored, or like pink. He's like, this song is really pink.
So jealous.
I know. I know, I am too.
It's just,
He when he took a break from music for a while, he almost entirely lost it, and now he
wow.
just sees he sees like dots, like corresponding to notes in music, and he definitely misses it. But
Yeah. That is incredible. The human mind is just absolutely mental. Like, I mean, just everything is mental. Pretty much
yeah,
anything
it
you can
is.
stop and think about is just mental. But
It's
yeah.
also mental too, just like, just being in a relationship with someone, just being like, even some of these like non-diagnosable things that you're just like,
Mm.
oh my God, you do this so differently. And no matter how much we talk about it, we might
No,
never understand why you think that way and I think this way.
it's
Or like,
mental,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
What is wrong with all these people?
yeah. What is wrong with all these people? I have to tell you, it's just kind of some fun parallel in gosh, this whole podcast is gonna be a little hot, everybody. Might have this input a little high in this mic. Am I rough on your end?
Okay.
Okay.
But I
Um
don't really, yeah,
okay.
care about these things anyway.
um uh just some parallel a little bit between our stories is I grew up in a very evangelical, charismatic, Pentecostal church, and then I also went to California to do a discipleship program
Okay.
within that church when I was like
Ah,
19, right out of high school. Very,
wow. Off
very
on the coast?
on the yeah, in Sacramento. Yep,
Yeah.
and it was very intense, and but it's all that stuff is like I don't know. I feel like I've been able to integrate a lot of like, man, well, I'm kind of thankful for where that pushed me faster and like fast tracked me
Yeah,
to like,
absolutely.
then I went into like philosophy right after that. And like, I was like, I don't know if that process would have unfolded so quick without that intense experience,
Yeah.
very intense
Yeah.
experience.
Some of the best years of my life. Honestly, I look back and go, gosh, I couldn't do it again now as
Yeah.
me, but God, I wish I could experience that as I experienced it again.
Yeah.
Like it was an amazing time in so many ways.
Yeah. And it's the
But
same thing with like, growing up in the closet and coming out. It's like, I kind of can't wish it any other way because I like where I am.
right.
Um, I'd love to hear a little bit, Phil,
Mm.
about anything that's like, I watched some of your stuff and listened to some of your stuff too that was like 8 years old or whatever.
Oh wow.
And there's like, oh yeah, that's a different Phil now. That's a different Phil maybe a year ago, right? And, as we all are. I'd
Yeah.
love to hear a little bit about what some of the stuff that you personally feel like you've integrated from your upbringing that you're like, oh man, like this has still been useful to me, or like I look at this favorably.
Sure.
Because I think as like people deconstruct, if we're using that word, it's so much about like what I'm letting go of and what it's not. I'd love to hear a little bit about what you've held on to or integrated, and also maybe about a little bit of like in replacement of what has been left behind, like a sense of like what inspires you now and
Mm.
we tapped into that a little bit, but like what the pursuit feels like for you now.
Sure. I mean, uh, to be honest, this is a funny thing, right? I mean, with faith, it just feels like everything dovetails. If you grew up in faith, right? So you grew up in an evangelical, charismatic world, you know that like the what you want to do with your future, who you are, your friends, who you're going to marry, like all of this is so interwoven with your faith.
Yeah.
Like so when you start to unravel your faith, you're starting to unravel who you are. You're
Yeah.
starting to unravel your future, maybe your purpose on
Mm.
earth. Is there a purpose to being on earth? All these things start to kind of come apart. Like, the person that you spend hours a day talking to, who's always there in the car or at the end of the night or whatever, suddenly isn't there. Or if they are there, they're a different person because you don't believe in that old God, you believe in a new God. Or all these your friends aren't there anymore. You made new friends. They don't get you the same way, and they don't get that you went through this weird experience, right? So they're
Yeah.
in some ways better, but in some ways they're not that great because they don't get it. Or all these things start unraveling. And so I think there is something quite unique to the process of deconstruction, that we lose so much more than we choose to lose. So
Yes.
you start to think about certain things and question one thing, and you don't realize that questioning this one thing leads to you don't speak to your parents again for 7 years,
Yeah.
leads to you don't get to be a part of this community anymore, leads to you no longer feel any purpose to life for decades, 2 months, whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's different for everyone. And so, I lost a lot in questioning things, but I'm kind of weird in that I think, again, because I'm disconnected from my emotion, I actually really love this stuff. I love questioning. I love unraveling. I love like existential crisis because I engage with it almost entirely at a rational, logical level.
Yeah.
I'm probably having the worst emotional breakdown of my life behind the scenes, but I'm not in touch with that, so it's fine. I'm a therapist's nightmare. There's genuinely psychologists listening to me going, fucking hell, this guy's a minefield. But on the whole, I really do enjoy it. But the thing is, what's interesting as well is that what we lose, you know, some of these bigger things like community and things, they're huge things, purpose and that. But what all of that stuff, as far as who I am and how I live my life day to day, it's probably a tiny fraction of who I am. I'm still the same guy that loves my family. I still want to be a part of something. I still get life out of not listening to music or listening to music or watching this particular genre on Netflix or whatever it is, right? I still like going for hikes. I still love my wife. Like, you know, I'm still the same person. And I think that can be a really hard process as people deconstruct. They often feel that everything has changed, but actually there's so much from those seasons that you're taking a step away from that probably did shape who you are today. Well, it did,
Yeah.
no way about it. And actually, much of who you shaped into be today, you actually like. Now, of course, some of it you're like, well, if I didn't go to church, I wouldn't be this stupid, you know, blah, 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 or I wouldn't have this problem, or I wouldn't have this issue. And yes, like definitely growing up in church gave me a whole host of issues. And I'm glad to be, you know, devolving myself of that and moving beyond that and healing from that and so on. But actually, being a part of some of these movements, you know, that church in California taught me to come out of my shell, taught me to engage with people in a much more effective way, which is someone that is, you know, not so neurotypical. That was huge. You know, I mean, the fact that I was able to travel around the world and speak to thousands of people and engage with dozens of people every night and stay in random strangers' homes and connect with them and have them like me. And like, that was all because I came along to these kind of Christian movements. I would never have been able to do that if you'd grabbed me out of high school and just the few homes I've been in and different things like I wouldn't have been able to cope. So I've got these social skills. I can do personal. In fact, I can sit down with someone I've never met. We have no outline, right? You're just like, do you want to come on my podcast and chat? And I'm like, yeah, sure. I'm fine. I could go another 8 hours. I'm having a good time. Like, don't worry, I won't make you. But you know, like I'm good. Like, and that's not normal for me. That's something I learned in these kind of environments. The fact that like I am comfortable hugging people, I learned that through brutal pain of being a part of a church where everyone hugs, whether you liked it or not. And again, as someone that's maybe not so neurotypical, that was not comfortable and I didn't like it. And actually now I love being hugged. My love language is touch. And so it unlocked some of that for me going, oh, actually, I love getting a hug. I love when someone gives me a little head scratch or, you know, like pat on the back. I just love it. And so I think there's so many of these little things that actually are probably the majority of who we are. You know, they shaped who we are. They shaped our ethics and our moral. You know, so many Christians go, well, you can't have morality without religion and God. And of course, that's absolute bullshit and nonsense. Like, you know, there's plenty of people outside of religion that have a much deeper and more meaningful and more healthy frame of morality.
And perhaps more thought out.
Yeah, well, morality, if you look at, so we touched on developmental theory, we touched on inspired acts, but another developmental theory, because there's hundreds of different models. Inspired dynamics is about your values, but there's a model that's based on your morals. So how do your morals develop as you grow up? And what's interesting is when you look at how religion shapes morality and ethics, it's the first 2 out of 6 stages. It doesn't really get beyond that. Occasionally they get to 3 or 4 if they're very evolved, but even still, it's still rooted mostly in the first 2 stages, which is fear of punishment, avoiding punishment, and getting rewards. That's the second stage. And that's basically all of religion. And so actually, you know, while I'm glad for some of my point being that even though that was maybe faulty and I've moved beyond that, actually a lot of the way I see the world, a lot of what I think is kindness and love and caring for other people, wanting to care for the homeless, wanting to care for orphans and people that are out in the luck, caring about immigrants and the plight of people that are displaced because of our wars and our horrific opinions on what we should be, what the rest of the world should be doing and what it should be like. Like, I care about that stuff large part because I grew up in a church which cared about that. Now, if I grew up in an atheist club that cared about that, it would be the same thing. So I'm not saying that it only could happen in the church, but it happened in my church. That's where it happened. And I need to kind of embrace that and be thankful for it. I don't want to throw it away. I don't want to be a guy that doesn't like homeless people because that's to do with religion, right? Like,
yeah.
That seems not good. So like, you know what I mean? It's religious people also don't murder. So fuck that. I'm off on a murdering spree. It's like, No, but religious people don't murder because they think God will send them to hell. That makes me uncomfortable around religious people, right? Because like if they realize that's a sham, are they just going to go on a killing spree? But I do agree that we shouldn't kill people. Correct. Like I tick. That's my box. I'm holding on to that when I'm not getting rid of it. And so I think there's loads. And actually, I think if we stopped about it, the parts of who we are and how we connect with other people, how we see the world, how we move forward, most of that stuff is probably very similar on the whole. And so, yeah, I think I still embraced so much of what I grew up. My parents are amazing. They gave their lives. They literally gave their entire lives to caring for people in their community. You know, I mean, they got paid nothing. They just opened their doors and let anyone come in, and they helped them. And that was their life. Till my mom died a few years ago. My dad's still doing it to some degree. Wow. Why would I not take some of that, the ethos behind that and allow it to influence my life? I don't want to throw any of that away. Maybe some parts of it, of doing it to a destructive level that causes your kids to resent you at times, or, you know, or you don't spend enough time with your kids, or there's certain parts maybe that, and actually they did spend a lot of time with us, but, you know, there could be some components where you go, I want to tweak it, I want to change or whatever, but I don't want to throw everything out. I think that's a relatively childish approach. And I think sometimes we have that approach. I've certainly done the throwing out the baby with the bathwater at times, but I don't want to do it by default, for sure.
Love to talk to you about this idea of like being authentic and true to yourself around people that potentially aren't in a place to where you being authentic will cause an issue, right? Sure. I heard you, and then I think when you were talking to your wife in a podcast, talking about there was a time, old Phil in a different life, where when you were still like within the church but trying to like nudge people, that you're like, I don't want people to know I'm gay affirming because I'm going to lose this audience to affect them, right? And you came to a point where you're like, well, I'm just going to be out with it, so to speak. But I think, you know, that issue aside and other issues aside, I think we all find those instances where you're like, ooh, when I'm trying to connect with those people, or even just be in the same room at Thanksgiving with those people, like, how can I still be authentic, and what's the appropriate amount of a personal adjustment I make? I wonder, you're such a thoughtful person. I wonder if you've have any insight here about kind of how you handle like the authentic Phil you've become, and the one that can sit down at Thanksgiving with family or whoever.
It's tough, right? I mean, it is tough, and it depends on the person. It depends on the person you're sitting down with. It depends on the time, the place, the whatever. Every person I talk to handles this slightly uniquely. There's incredible overlap in their stories and their situations and the different relationships they have, but everyone's unique, and everyone has these unique relationships, and everyone's in a different space. Some people need to rip the Band-Aid off, and it's a freeing process that does a great deal of healing. Other people can't afford to do that, right? I spoke to a girl like a few days ago. She's employed by her Christian parents. She lives at home. Like, it's all like her entire life would be fucked overnight if she just ripped the Band-Aid off, right? So she's sitting there going, okay, I want to be authentic. I want to be myself. I want to not carry this huge weight and constantly live with this, you know, the analogy of a mask is not helpful really in the wrong climate for this analogy now, but like living with this mask on that says, I'm a happy, content Christian. I'm the person you always thought I was. And they're loving you, but you take the mask off and it's actually the mask that got loved. You feel like shit because they never loved you at all because you're not that person anymore, right? That's how so many of us live, and it's a really horrible place to live. Yeah. But I want to challenge the concept of even being authentic. What the fuck does that mean, right? Because part of my authentic self is I don't want to hurt my mom. So
I like that.
Me being authentic means being myself, but it also means that being myself means I don't want to hurt my mom. And so it's such a complex thing, right? It's not this simple black and white thing that we want to make it. And I think no one's going to get it right. There's always going to be, it's such a complex thing with 10,000 kind of pinpoint factors that maybe we'll get 9,000 right. That'd be great. That'd be a good day. But we're still going to end up touching raw nerves here or there, or pushing a little too far, or causing a bit of hurt that's going to have to be dealt with.
And that's not a bad thing too, right?
That's great. It's growth. It's bringing us together. And I think there's part of us being more open and being able to have these conversations that actually allows these relationships to grow and evolve. I talked to someone yesterday, and she was saying, She was talking about, setting up boundaries with her father and going like, I like, I need to stop this kind of behavior. But she's like, but I want to leave the relationship open. And I was like, well, actually, by not doing this, in some ways, you're closing your relationship down. It's actually in setting up a boundary. It says, hey, I want to be in your life, but I need you to stop doing this. What you're doing is you're opening up the relationship. You're allowing yourself to be more you, but you're taking certain topics off the table that are going to hurt us both.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, hey, look, that's not what we need to do right now. Let's put that to the side. I know it's important to you. It's actually important to me as well. But actually, I'm dealing with my own shit right now. And I need to be able to heal from that. Generally, don't say shit either. Like, probably not in space for that. But, I've got my own stuff right now, and I'm just trying to heal from that, because we put that to the side and let's revisit it in 6 months or a year. We can revisit if that's coming up or whatever. But right now, can we talk about football and the family and, your work and, ask me how my kids are doing, and like, let's have those conversations right now, and let's leave politics for now because that's just too much, or let's leave religion right now because it's too much. And I'd rather you didn't keep asking me if I'm going to church right now, because the answer is no, and I don't want to talk about it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Right. And that's hard to do. It's hard to set those boundaries. And it's especially hard to set those boundaries if you're not willing to set consequence. If you're actually not willing to stick to the consequence, then it's not a boundary, right? You're just going to get steamrolled over and over. It's tough. Huh. It's really tough.
I grew up, in the Midwest, and I don't know if you can relate at all, but it's so kind and passive and non-confrontational. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh yeah, but also, saying things that sometimes you said wrong and messing things up, and like having a conversation you didn't want to have is really important.
Yeah.
I've struggled my whole life with being like, even just, I'm such a questioner by nature that I'm always like, man, I have a hard time like saying what I think right now or believe in a nuanced way, because I might be wrong, right? Or like, how is this going to affect the other person?
Yeah. And you know what? There is no right path either. So here's the thing, like, if you asked me, you brought up the gay affirming point, which is like, I still think about it, and I'm like, oh, I just don't like that I wasn't more openly affirming sooner. And yet I can think of multiple prominent pastors that are now gay affirming from the pulpit because I worked with them without bringing that up.
Because you would have lost the audience. You would have lost them as an audience.
I wouldn't have had that connection. And in time, they started talking to me about it, and I helped them, and I gave them some resources. And in time,
they knew. They knew, Phil.
So on some level, they knew, right? Maybe who knows? But my point being that I think I did the wrong thing, and I should have been more open and more. I just think, at the end of the day, this is such an important issue, and people are dying over this issue. Like, I regret not being more open about that sooner. And I look back and go, shit, but if I had, that pastor wouldn't have done it, and who in his church would have died, or and it's like, fuck, there's no right answers to these things. We try and go, oh, this is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do. Either way, people die. Either way, people become better people. Like, it's such a messy life. And I think that is part of growing up as well, is realizing that this isn't so black and white. Enjoy the gray, figure it out. You're going to fuck up, but you know what? Maybe fucking up is part of the process. Just like, you hate the fact that you grew up in a religion, but actually because you're in a religion, your podcast is better or whatever, right? It's like, it's part of what makes you. Your comedy is better because you had more hardship. You're more well-rounded to help people that are hurting because your mom died when you were young. Like, fuck, like, you saying mom should have died young, that's a good thing? No, of course not. But it's helped you become a better person. So is that somehow a good thing? No. But good things have come from it. So like, let's not look at this as right or wrong, good, bad. It's all of it. It's just all of it. It's a big fucking mess. And you have to somehow make meaning out of this. So do that. Just enjoy making meaning out of the big fucking mess. I don't know. Like, what I mean? I just think like we get so bogged down. I can beat myself up all day about some of these things, or I can sit and pat myself on the back either way. And neither of those responses are helpful, healthy, right? That's just so introspective and unhealthy. Like, I should just move forward and let's see what comes of it, and try and make better decisions tomorrow, be more thoughtful, be more intentional, and then realize that in my great thoughtful intentionality, I fucked up again in a different way, and it's like, oh, it was a different situation, and it's again really great.
Well said.
I
potentially one last question, we'll see here, and this is open-ended, and it's okay if you don't have a response. I feel like, Phil, like, you're always thinking about something. Something's always top of mind. Like you're always playing with something in your head. Uh, is there something right now that's got your interest, or something right now that like you've been playing with in your head that's just like a little passion project, or something you're excited about that you'd love to share a little bit or get into?
Yeah, I don't know. I try and avoid a lot of my own faith. So one of the components of what I do is I work with people that are really vulnerable.
Mm.
So a lot of people that are coming out of faith, they come out of these fundamental faiths, and they've grown up in a world where they are looking to people to tell them what to believe, what to do, how to do it, all these different things.
Yeah.
And so as they come out of that, generally speaking, even though they're starting to think for themselves, even though they're starting to question, the natural default tendency is to go, so who's the person out here that's thinking for themselves and questioning that I can go and just gravitate to as my new leader to tell me what to do and how to do it?
Yes.
And so because of that, I try and avoid talking about a lot of my own personal faith and journey, because I think it's probably quite unfair, and it could actually be quite ethically questionable, where I allow people to latch onto me as your new guru or leader or whatever, and like we've covered, I am not a good person to latch onto. Do not latch onto this. Like, Jesus, you don't want to know where this train's going. Straight to Tiger Town, right? I mean, like,
but give him a hug at least. That kind of latch on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take a hug. Yeah, but so I think there's that component, but I also recognize that maybe people on your podcast are maybe less likely to be in that space, and so I'm probably happy to talk about some stuff. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about recently is, there's a philosophy, you'll be aware of this as a philosopher, but just thinking a lot about solipsism, which of course is the concept that nothing can be known apart from I am. Nothing. Nothing is known. And it's quite funny because, when you look through different philosophies, this is extraordinary philosophers, Western, Eastern, for thousands of years, so many different things that are amazing thoughts and experiments and ideas and concepts that can be explored and put together and torn apart and recanted and challenged and evolved. And what's interesting about the basic principle of understanding that apart from knowing I exist, nothing is knowable. What's funny about it is you can't refute that. It is irrefutable that anything is knowable apart from I exist.
Right.
Everything is subjective outside of that.
I think I would maybe personally reframe that a little bit and agree in some ways, where it's like nothing is certain.
Yes.
You potentially could have knowledge, but you can't be necessarily certain of that knowledge.
Sure. So
right?
When I say knowable, as in, I just mean that nothing is an objective, knowable fact that I can grab and go, I've figured this out and know it. Yes. So exactly. It cannot be this concrete known. It might be objective truth, but we can't know that we have objective truth.
Right. You
cannot know it. It can only ever be subjectively experienced.
Yeah. You can accidentally be right. You could have good reason to be right and potentially have the correct knowledge, but you're never really justified in being certain.
No, there's zero ways. So you look at like one of the things I think about often, right? So I assume you have dreams occasionally. I don't dream.
Oh god. Oh my gosh. I started taking some L-theanine before I go to bed, and it's insane how much you dream.
Oh, I want to do that because I don't dream much at all.
Oh my goodness, it's intense.
The reason I mentioned dreaming is like, right, so you have a dream, right? You go to sleep, you're in dream world, so you probably don't even know you're dreaming unless you're lucid, right? So you're in the dream, there's you, Johnny, in the dream.
Yep.
Oh, and there's my mom, and there's my husband, and my husband's like wrestling a dog, and he's wearing a unitard, and the dog has makeup on, and oh, there's a tree talking, and now I'm in a classroom and I'm naked, and now this is happening, right? Yeah. And all this stuff's going on, right? Whether it's weird or normal or whatever. You wake up, right? Who was Johnny in the dream, right? You go, well, I was one of those characters, right, in this dream.
Yeah.
But also, I was the dog in the unitard wearing makeup, and I was also the tree. And I literally made all of that up, right? It always cracks me up whenever I wake myself up laughing at something that happened in my dream. I'm like, the nature of comedy is surprise. You cannot laugh without that twist. How the fuck did I do that to myself? Like I twist-a-rude myself, right? I surprise myself, like, and there's this bizarre notion that like everything out there feels separate, feels different to me, feels as though it's some separate objective thing. but that's how I feel like when I'm dreaming. And when I wake up, I'm like, oh, I just made all that shit up and just chose to identify with one part of it. And I just go, that's just as likely right now. It's just as likely that I am just identifying with one thing that I am making up. I'm just having some bizarre, weird dream. And maybe me just talking about it right now to you is slightly becoming lucid of the dream. And just exploring the kind of solipsism and just sitting with that, like, I only know that there's me. But actually, I don't know this Johnny. I could be I could be in a mental health ward, strapped down to a gurney because I am completely gone, and they've just dosed me up with more drugs, and I am just imagining a whole world in which people actually care what I think and put me on a podcast to talk to someone, and they think that they should listen to me. Like, of course I'm dreaming, right? This is a ridiculous notion. This is a fantastical idea. And I love sitting. I mean, I just love sitting and playing with these things all day. But it's just so fascinating, the concept of, like, you know, engaging with our life more loosely, engaging with our life a bit more gently, understanding that, like, on some level, that's what makes life interesting, right? If you could maybe take a step back and look at your life as a show, right? A TV show.
Yeah.
And every day is an episode, maybe, like, you know, a month is a season or something. And you go, like, what's the season's main arc going to be? What's going to happen to the main character? Is this going to be a good episode? Well, what's a good episode? The good episode is when his wife gets hit by a car or his kid gets mauled by a dog or something. I mean, that's a good episode, right? That's exciting. But I don't want to be in that good episode, right? And it's fascinating, right? But when you can kind of take a step back and look at life and go, is this a good episode? You can go to bed at night and go, that dream I just had, was it good? Because I don't want a dream that's boring. Like, no one wants that, right? We want something that's full of life and ups and downs and interest. And so, yeah, I don't know if I said anything interesting, but it's stuff that bounces around my head. And I like playing with these ideas and just going, what is going on, right? Have you taken enough mushrooms? This makes sense.
Yeah.
I've not taken mushrooms for about a year now. I've been off for about a year, but I'm going to do another high dose soon, I think, because God, it's just, you suddenly are like, yeah, of course this is a dream. Of course there's nothing but consciousness. Like, of course. Like, you come off the mushrooms, you're like, that makes no sense at all. Who am I? No one's going to believe me now. No one's going to I don't understand it anymore. But yeah, I don't know. That's probably a terrible answer to your question.
Well, I did pick up on the thread that there was yet another animal mauling in this story.
Look, I just got a dog.
Yeah.
Do you know what? Talking about animals, right? So just got my dog. We've had a neighbor that's got this huge British bulldog, right? It's about 2 feet high, about 1.5 feet wide, and about 4 feet long. So it's not that big. It's a little puppy. And it literally has broken into our garden multiple times. We've reinforced the fence multiple times. Yesterday, it managed to chew through chicken wire.
Wow.
It chewed through metal to get into our garden. And this thing is so big and heavy, and it's really friendly. It's not scary, but it's constantly jumping up on you while you're trying to, like, get it, while you're yelling at your neighbor going, come around and get your dog. And honestly, I'm so scared of this really friendly dog because it's so big. And it's bulldogs, man. I'm not a big fan of bulldogs. Sorry if you have a bulldog and you hate me, but they're covered in snot, right? And so, like, they're like, and like, you look down and I'm wearing black, and it's just like, it looks like I've been gang raped by snails, right? I'm just like covered in snot from head to toe. That's probably the worst analogy ever. But, like, I am just disgusting. And I'm looking at this dog and I'm like, you are the worst. So I think I'm constantly on edge. Every time I go in my garden, I'm scared I'm going to be, like, attacked by this big dog, which is attacked with, like, love. You know, it doesn't know it weighs, 100 pounds or whatever. So that's probably in the back of my head when I'm talking about tigers and dogs and different attacking.
You know, I see a photo of a fox behind you. I'm very I'm very much, like, into, like, dogs and wolves and foxes. And there was one day where it was like, speaking of Johnny doesn't have enough time to have to work, and there was one day where I was, like, on my phone researching dogs for, like, hours and hours and hours. And I was like, at the end of this whole research, I thought I was looking up the dog I wanted. And then I realized by the end of it that I was like, no, I'm trying to figure out the dog I want to be.
It's like the most convoluted Facebook quiz. What kind of onion are you? It's like, what kind of dog are you? You are now, like, you could probably program the back end for that quiz.
Yeah. I was like, I don't think actually I want a dog. I think I just want to be a dog.
I am so with you. Do you know one of the things that I've taught Maya, our little dog, and my wife is dying with laughter. I've taught Maya to scratch my head.
You taught your dog to scratch your head?
Yes.
Like, good for you.
I want to be a dog.
Yeah.
Certainly, as puppies, they sleep 20 hours a day. They get lots of play. They get lots of physical touch. They eat. That's it, right? They get to shit and piss anywhere, and people pick it up. Like,
that's great. It's a great life.
It's wonderful. I'm in.
Every dog we want, like I think we're quite a far away from having a dog, but every dog we want is just like, we want such like big dogs. We want like Malamutes and Shepherds, and like we can't. I know we can't.
I wanted a big dog as well, but we settled for slightly. I mean, she's kind of medium sized basically, but yeah.
Are you liking it?
Yeah, it's great.
Is this your first dog?
Yeah, I mean, I had dogs as a kid and stuff, but I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to get up in the middle of the night. I am deranged right now. I'm just like, I can't even think straight. I'm tired all the time. Like, it requires so much time. It's still in that stage where it really doesn't like being left alone. So you're slowly trying to build up that tolerance. And I'm just like, I don't do well in neediness, right? I generally speaking don't like other beings near me. Just go away. Like, if you're in the room and I'm trying to read and you're breathing, it's annoying me. You know, I mean, that's the kind of person I'm just like, go away. When I want to hang out with people, I'll go hang out with people. Same kind of with animals. Dogs are okay. Cats are my favorite, if I'm honest, because they're not so needy. Dogs are really needy. So we're working on like loosening up that neediness. And I think once that starts to be a bit less intense, it'll be a lot easier.
There are breeds out there, like, specifically with like Malamutes and Huskies, that they're very much like come up to you and like, hey, and then they go sit on their own. Yeah, it's like that's all they need.
I thought about Husky. They're so freaking vocal though. I mean, they just sing and scream all the time. We're like in it's called a terrace in the UK, so a big like strip of houses. Okay. So we have neighbors either side of us, and like you sneeze and you can hear each other. Like, welcome.
You can't do that.
We're poor. We're poor, and we're in the UK. I know in America no houses are connected, but like they are here. Kind of they are. But yeah, it just would not be a good idea for us to get a Husky. That would be the most harsh thing to ever do to our neighbors.
Yeah.
Like, they're just like, let me sing you the song of my people at 4 a.m. You know, it's like, cheers.
Phil, thank you so much for doing this podcast. It was great connecting with you. I feel like I've got so much listening to do to enjoy that since I've discovered you and finished the Spiral Dynamics series.
Don't go back 8 years though, geez.
I had to.
I have to. Crazy.
I have to do my research. But we were all crazy 8 years ago, and we'll think we're crazy 8 years.
I'm crazy now.
Yeah. If people want to check you out, I'll post some links. But specifically, there's your podcast, right?
Sure, the Phil Drysdale Show. I do some stuff mostly with guests, have experts on about mostly the concept of religion and leaving religion. So people that are experts in cults and religious trauma and things like that. But I also have random people on just to share their stories and things like that. But yeah, Instagram is the best place to find me. So I'm just Phil Drysdale. I do weekly Q&As. I put out memes and research data and all sorts of different things. And so that's probably the best place to kind of connect. Through that, you can find my podcast, my YouTube channel. We've got an online community you can join. There's a network called the Deconstruction Network, which is completely free, but it helps you find other people in your local area that have left faith and religion. If that's something you're looking for. And so there's all those kind of links can all be found through my Instagram. So it's the best place to go. And I'm always happy to talk to people. It's what I do. So don't feel guilty if you're like, I wish I could talk to someone that kind of gets it. Shoot me a message. So yeah.
I want to see a separate Instagram handle for all your prayer requests that are sent to you that are mean-spirited.
It would be so funny, wouldn't it? Yeah, I would feel too bad.
But you won't feel that emotion till after you post it, right?
That's true. I'll just not engage with that one.
Yeah, man.
My wife would connect with it and draw it out, and then I'd feel bad. Yeah.
Okay, so logically go into it, you shouldn't. Hey, you're the best, man. Thanks so much.
I really enjoyed it.
Have a good time with your brother today too.
Come on, dance appetite, dance to the middle of the